Afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure on this absolutely beautiful fall afternoon to welcome all of you indoors to what is the first of 3 lectures this year that will be given by members of our own faculty about their own scholarly or scientific work. This is a series that I inaugurated over 8 years ago now, because I realized that so often we invite scholars from all over the world to come and speak to us at Princeton, and yet we so seldom have an opportunity to hear one of our own talk about their own work. And so this series was really created with that goal in mind. And over the years, the attendance at these lectures is a wonderful affirmation of how much people value and welcome the opportunity to know what their colleagues are doing. This afternoon's lecture, the first lecture in this series, will be given by Professor Naomi Leonard. And to introduce her, I have asked the chair of the Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, Lex Smits, the Eugene Higgins Professor of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, to provide the introduction. Lex.
Thank you, Shirley. It is indeed an honor to introduce today's speaker. Naomi Leonard received her Bachelor of Science and Engineering degree from our department at Princeton in 1985, and she then went on to work as an engineer in the electric power industry for 4 years. And then she decided that graduate work was for her, and she took her MS and PhD degrees in electrical engineering. Notice the switch of fields there, from the University of Maryland. And then when she graduated there, she joined our department in 1994. And it's been a remarkable career since then. She is now the Edwin S. Wilsey Professor of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering. She's an associated faculty in the program in Applied and Computational Mathematics. In 2004, she was awarded a John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation Fellowship. The list goes on. I'm not going to give it all to you, but just to give you some of this. She's a fellow of the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers. She received the University of California, Santa Barbara Muhammad Dali Distinguished Lecturer Award, the Automatica Prize Paper Award, Office of Naval Research Young Investigator Award, National Science Foundation Career Award, and in 2001 she was the Lisa Meitner Guest Professor at Lund University in Sweden, and in 2007 she was a visiting professor at the University of Pisa in Italy. Her work has been described as brilliant, carefully and beautifully crafted, mathematically rigorous, theoretically deep, and conceptually elegant. But I think that one of the most interesting things about watching her career is how she has moved from a deep theoretical analysis of nonlinear dynamics and control to including experiments and widening the scope of her work so that what was theoretical work became very practical, and her work has found application in the control and operation of underwater vehicles, and that led to some wonderful experiments actually done in Monterey Bay, and Naomi and her students all traveled to Monterey Bay, I think for a couple of summers, right, and spent their time actually operating underwater vehicles and monitoring the signals and trying to analyze the patterns of the movement, trying to develop these coordinated control systems. And from there, the natural evolution has been to look at schooling and flocking behavior, and that leads us to today's talk, Flocks and Fleets, Collective Motion in Nature and Robotics. Thank you, Naomi.
Is this working? Can you hear me? Great. So thank you very much. Thank you, Lex. Thank you, Shirley, for the invitation. It's really a special pleasure to be able to speak to this audience of colleagues and students and family and friends and others from the community. So my goals today, actually I have 3 goals. My first goal is to give you some insight into how complex motion of a group as a whole can emerge from a collection of relatively simple individuals. And my second goal is to show you how it's possible and why it's so illuminating to study collective motion of both natural groups and robotic groups as part of the same story. And my third goal is to impress upon you the role of feedback in all of this. So by feedback, I mean the responsive decision-making of the individuals and how mathematical models and mathematical methods can be used to formalize an investigation of collective motion. So by a group, I'm referring to a collection of individuals. So let's call them agents, where every agent can move around independently on its own. Every agent can sense something about its local environment, including something about the external world and or something about the other individuals in the group. And every individual can make its own decisions about how it wants to respond to what it can sense. So a group here can mean a collection of natural agents, like this zebra herd, this flock of birds, this school of dolphins. So here an agent is an animal that can walk or fly or swim, can sense, and can make its decisions on how to respond to what it senses. But a group can also refer to a collection of engineered agents. So, for example, a collection of robotic vehicles that can move on land or in the air or in the sea, perhaps with some purpose such as environmental monitoring or exploring a new terrain or performing a search and rescue operation. So here every agent is a robot that has its own means of propulsion and sensing and computation so that it can also walk or drive around or fly or swim on its own. It can sense its local environment and can use its computational power to make its own decisions about how to respond to what it senses. So you can see, in fact, very well from this beautiful video, that the remarkable collective motion of natural groups can provide enormous inspiration if we're trying to think about how to design robotic groups. So, for example, this animal groups like this fish school move in these beautiful patterns, which are believed to give these animals advantage in things like foraging and migration and avoiding predators. And we'd certainly like to enable those kinds of qualities in groups of robotic vehicles. We'd like our vehicles, for instance, to act like efficient foragers of information or avoiding potential hazards. In fact, this second movie over here is an animation of this robotic ocean sampling network that my colleagues and I developed and demonstrated in Monterey Bay, California. And here there are a collection of these robotic underwater vehicles that you'll see in a second that move in and around the bay. They move around on their own, collecting data on the ocean physics, on the ocean biology. Here the idea is to gain a better understanding of the coastal ocean, of the ecosystem, of the role of the ocean in climate change. And what we're interested in is how to program, see these little guys moving around, these individual robots, their own onboard decision-making so that they can behave, for example, like a school of fish to become efficient foragers of useful data despite stormy seas and other challenges associated with the ocean. So, but I want to point out that this is not a story of biomimicry. Animals and robots are so very, very different. We're not trying here to copy nature and put it into the robots. Instead, what we're looking for are the mechanisms and the principles underlying the connection between what individuals do, the decisions that individuals make, and what we see at the level of the group. And so this raises the important questions that we try to address. That is, what are the individual interactions? What are the decisions that the individuals make that lead to performance at the level of a group? And how can we develop a predictive means for understanding this? So, for instance, what individual interactions and decisions lead to fast decision-making of a group, lead to efficient resource collection at the level of the group, lead to robust behavior despite uncertainty and disturbances in the environment at the level of the group. And these questions are challenging. They're challenging both in biology. They push the limits of what we know animal groups are doing. And they push the limits in engineering. They push the limits of how we are able reliably to design decisions on individuals that lead to the kind of group performance that we're looking for. So it gives us a joint challenge here. On the one hand, we want to understand how to explain the enabling mechanisms in animal groups. And on the other hand, we want to understand how to define provable mechanisms for our robotic groups. And so this suggests an integrated approach, one where we want to think about common models for the biological and the engineered settings. So the key element in this that I mentioned at the very beginning is this notion of feedback. So feedback exists in any system that's changing in time, whether it be engineered or natural. Every system in our body uses feedback as a way to deal with uncertainty and still be able to regulate and perform. So feedback has three components to it, three steps. A system will first sense. It will take some measurement of how it's behaving. It will then apply a rule. It will have some response that it determines in response to what it sensed. And then it will act. It will implement this response. And it will do this over and over to correct its behavior so that it behaves in the way that it wants to or it's supposed to. So here's a very mundane example. Think about the cruise control in your car. You've punched in 55 miles per hour, and so the cruise control kicks in. It's a feedback loop. First, what's sensed? The speed of the car. Then a rule is applied. For example, you would compare the speed that you're moving to the speed, the 55 miles per hour that you'd like to go, and a rule would determine what to do. Then the car would act on that. It would accelerate or decelerate to correct the error in the speed. Of course, it's more complicated than that. The rule has to be pretty sophisticated so that not only do you get to 55 miles per hour, but that you do it in a way that doesn't make everybody in the back of the car uncomfortable. You don't want to exceed the speed limit, or the driver might get a ticket. And you may have to worry about whether the car's going uphill or downhill, or the road is bumpy or it's raining. So we use tools I have a whole suite of mathematical tools to think about how to design this box. What should this rule be? So this is already complicated enough, but when we start to think about groups, then we have one of these feedback loops for every single individual in the group. So I'm showing you here only a picture of three. Picture this is one fish, two fish, and three fish. Each one of them has its own loop. Each one is sensing its environment, each one is responding, and each one is acting. And it's already messy enough with all these arrows, and that's just three fish. There's extra arrows here because they may be sensing each other. So in order to get our hands around this, let's look at each of these three boxes. The first one is the sensing box. And again, this is already quite complicated because we have lots of individuals who are sensing their environment, sensing each other. They may not be able to sense everybody, so we have to somehow keep a track of who they're sensing, and that might be even changing in time as they move relative to one another. And so the way we go about modeling this is to make use of a very well-known mathematical construct called a graph. So a graph is a way to encode the interagent sensing topology, who's sensing whom at a given moment. So what you see here is an example of a graph. Now I have 6 agents, or 6 fish. Each one of those purple dots represents a fish, and the arrows tell us at this moment in time who's sensing whom. So for instance, fish number 1 has an arrow pointing to 4, 3, and 2, so fish number 1 can sense those 3 other fish at this moment in time. Fish 3 can't sense fish 1. Maybe he's ahead of fish 1 and he can't see behind him, but he can sense fish 2 and fish 5. So what we do with this is not just draw the picture, but we can encode this in an array of numbers. Call this array L. So this encodes all of these dots and all of the arrows in between them. And I've shown you a couple of examples. Here's an example with 4 fish. We call this a complete graph because every agent can sense every other agent. And here's the corresponding encoding of that interaction. Here's another situation with 4 fish, but everybody can only sense one other guy, and everybody's only sensed by one other guy, and this we call it a directed cycle. And again, there's an encoding, an L array that it describes what's going on. Okay, the second box then is apply the rule. Okay, and so what are some of the basic ingredients here that we use in our model? So we think about basic ingredients for individual decisions that are motivated by what biologists understand animals are doing and by what we think is practical to implement on engineered systems, on robotic vehicles. So there's three things we have to consider. We can only have a rule that takes into account what these agents can sense. And that might be quite limited. So an agent might only be able to sense its local neighbors, guys nearby, and not necessarily the whole group. And when they sense a local neighbor, it may be the case that they can't sense the absolute position or the absolute speed, only the position, say, or the speed or the heading of their neighbors relative to themselves. And likewise, if they're sensing something about their environment, say the concentration of a nutrient, they're not going to be able to sense the whole environment like a gradient over a region. They'll only be able to take measurements along the path that they're moving. So then how do agents decide? So we model things with no central command. So there's no leaders, there's no omniscient leaders in the group. And the decisions are all decentralized. Everybody's making up their own mind what to do. And finally, what do agents decide? Well, they typically want to keep a cohesive group, so they're going to try to align with their neighbors and maybe be attracted to some of their near neighbors. Of course, they're going to want to avoid collisions, so when they get very close, they're going to repel from their near neighbors. Okay, the third block was act, right? So here we're going to model all of our individuals as moving around on a flat surface at the same constant speed. Okay, so what can they do if they're moving at a constant speed? The only thing that's left to do is to steer, to turn around. And so the rule is going to be one that's going to prescribe a steering rate, a turning rate, that depends upon the available measurements. In particular, measurements of relative headings and measurements of relative positions. And I've shown you here a little diagram. So basically looking overhead now on our three fish, right? The black arrows show you the direction of motion. The blue lines tell you the path of where they've just been. And these thetas, so theta tells us the angle, the direction, the heading of fish number 1. Theta 2 is the direction of fish number 2. The R's tell us the positions. Okay, so those are the ingredients at the level of the individual. Now I have to tell you something about how we characterize collective motion at the level of the group. And we do that using this notion of synchrony. Okay, so I'm showing you two different pictures here of a group of 12 individuals. Again, you're looking overhead. These little circles are the individuals. And on the left, you see 12 guys are all heading due east. And so their headings are all synchronized, right? Now, if you look at the picture on the right, there's 12 individuals. You might not be able to tell because not only are their headings synchronized, they're heading in the southwest direction, their positions are also synchronized. They're right on top of each other. Okay, so if we want to think about how to connect these two, the individual level and the group level, it's important to understand how to encode or measure synchrony in a group. And so we do that in a very simple way that I've illustrated up here in the top left corner. So I've drawn our three fish angles, theta 1, theta 2, theta 3, and I've drawn these red arrows that have length 1, pointing in each of those three directions. The black arrow is the average of these three red arrows. So it can take a value between 0 and 1, its length. I'm going to call its length p theta. And that number from 0 to 1 gives me a measure of synchrony. Because if everybody's all synchronized, then the average is just the vector that points in that direction. It has length 1. And if the headings are all such that p theta is equal to 0, then the directions are all completely anti-synchronized or unsynchronized. We actually call it balance because they're all balancing each other out. So this is the case, for instance, if for every guy heading this way, there's another guy heading in exactly the other direction. Okay. Now what's more is that this measure of synchrony also is a measure of the speed or the momentum of the group as a whole. So picture all these guys heading in the same direction, moving at their constant speed. They're all moving off together like I'm showing you in this bottom picture. Right? They're all moving off at their maximal. The group speed is the maximal it can possibly be, just like p theta is the highest it can be. And when they're moving in such a way that their headings are all balancing out, the group isn't going anywhere. The center of the mass of the group is 0. P theta is equal to 0. And this is interesting because these are the two motions that I think you'll recall from that video of the fish. They were either sort of all moving together, or they were all moving in a circle. And what's interesting is that this one little parameter distinguishes those two very important motions. And it's extremized. It's maximum for one and it's minimum for the other. And so that suggests an interesting possible rule for what an individual might be doing that leads to these kinds of behaviors. So let me explain this. So if you take this measure, this number p theta, and you take its gradient relative to theta 1. So what does that mean? That just gives us a formula for how theta 1, how fish 1 should change its heading to increase p theta. What does that mean? It means it's heading towards contributing to more synchrony, right? That essentially gives us a rule, and what's really nice is that formula is actually a function of relative headings. And I can take it a step further, so I can manipulate p theta a little bit, so it depends upon L, so that I encode all the neighborhoods in there, so that when I take the gradient of the L-dependent p theta, I get a rule for my fish 1 to change its heading to increase synchrony that depends upon relative headings of its neighbors. Okay? So this gives us a rule that looks something like this. It's actually a very simple and natural rule that looks very similar to the kinds of rules biologists like to use. It says basically, look at your neighbors, look at the relative headings of them, sum those up, divide by the number of neighbors, and then multiply by some gain, some constant, call it k theta, and that's your steering rate. So if k theta is positive, you're turning in the direction for increased synchrony. If k theta is negative, you're moving away from synchrony. In fact, you're moving towards balancing headings in the group. And so I'm showing you the case here where these 12 individuals, again, you're looking overhead at these guys moving around, and they've converged to synchronized heading because they've applied this rule with k theta is equal to a positive number. And on the right, they're applying that very same rule with just this very small change in one single parameter in their decision rule. They've made it negative. And now they're moving around so that the center of mass of this group isn't going anywhere. So what's really nice is it's very systematic, and we can actually prove things. We can prove, for instance, what kinds of neighborhoods guarantee these kinds of convergence results. So I've just put in a little cartoon to illustrate this. So picture our three fish. So fish 1 is heading towards 11 o'clock, fish 2 towards 7 o'clock, fish 3 towards 6 o'clock. Fish 2 and 3, they're just going to maintain their old heading, but fish 1 is going to try really hard to synchronize. So he's going to apply this rule. So here he is. P theta is pretty low. They're not very well synchronized. He applies his rule, and in the next time step, he says, I should be heading towards 8 o'clock. So he moves towards 8 o'clock, and here we go, moving up the p theta hill. He's just doing his own local thing and contributing to synchrony. He does it again. He computes that he should be heading towards 7 o'clock, and again, synchrony is increased. So everything I've said so far only has to do with the synchrony of the directions of motion. I haven't said anything about the spatial synchrony. But what's really nice is that we can derive a measure of spatial synchrony in a completely analogous way to what we just did for the headings. So call this measure PS, derive it completely analogously. And again, I'll take the gradient of this with respect to theta 1 to figure out how fish 1 should adjust its heading to now increase synchrony in the spatial dimension. So the synchrony here, what's going on, is that I have these guys, in addition to steering, I have them have a steering term that's just a constant. So they keep wanting to go around a circle in addition to organizing themselves. And so what the synchrony going on here is that the circles are becoming coincident. They're synchronizing the circles about which they're traveling. And so you can see in the bottom here, when I have my individuals apply this rule, where it's the gradient of the spatial synchrony measure. So now Ks is the corresponding dial. If they make it positive, all these guys move on to the same circle. Furthermore, we can do both the spatial synchronization and we can prove that the spatial synchronization and the direction synchronization can happen simultaneously. And so when we have our individuals apply these, again, very simple rules, and in this case, Ks is positive for spatial synchrony, K theta is positive for heading synchrony. Starting from random initial conditions and directions, these guys move on to the same circle, and they're moving together in the same direction. So they're on top of each other. But we can also change the sign of this heading synchrony. So here they're looking for spatial synchrony, but balancing of headings, and you see them moving around the same circle where their headings, organized in such a way that the center of mass isn't moving anymore. And so we can go on with this. The story goes on. One can derive a whole slew of these kinds of synchrony parameters. Again, taking the derivative and getting new terms for steering rates. And I'm showing you here in a second 6 of these situations where 12 individuals, again, you're looking overhead at 12 individuals with funny initial positions and directions, and they're all going to apply essentially the same individual rule, except they're going to change. They're all going to have these very small changes in the parameters that they use. So you're going to see very, very different patterns emerging. Let me start the movie. So the guys in the top left are going to synchronize. The guys in the top middle are going to organize themselves, and this is with just a very small change in parameters, so that there are 2 groups of 6 on opposite sides of the circle. On the top right, it's 3 groups of 4, then we have 4 groups of 3, 6 groups of 2, and 12 groups of 1. So what's really interesting here is that suddenly we have this whole rich family of motion patterns that we know how they emerge from very simple or small changes in a very small number of parameters at the level of individual decisions. And furthermore, that because we know how to do this, we can reverse engineer things. We could look at animal groups, compute what the value of these measures of synchrony are, and back out, plausible individual rules that would lead to those kinds of patterns. We can do the same thing in engineering. We could say, wouldn't it be great if our vehicles moved in a certain way to collect data most efficiently, and then back out what those individual rules should be such that these kinds of patterns would emerge. And the story goes further. So here's a case where you can imagine that individuals with different modes of sensing might sense different signals for different purposes. So for instance, in this case, I have my 12 guys, and their sense of relative position is very local. So these 4 guys on top, for instance, are only sensing each other when it comes to relative position, so they've organized onto one circle. But when it comes to relative headings, they can look further. Perhaps they're able to sense relative headings more easily, so they can see further. So these guys are now organizing themselves in terms of which way they're heading across these loops. Right? You can see this is actually 4 groups of 3 when it comes to synchrony of headings. So we demonstrated all this in an experiment in Monterey Bay, California, this one that I told you about at the beginning, in August 2006 on these robotic vehicles called underwater gliders. So these are carrying sensors, and their job here was to move around and collect the richest possible data in this region that is 20 kilometers by 40 kilometers by more than 1,000 meters deep, just north of Monterey Bay. We programmed into these individual guys these very rules that I just showed you, so that on their own they could go out there and perform good schooling, good foraging for information. And they did this actually over the course of almost 24 days straight during the summer. And I'm going to show you here a movie of them moving around. So this is quite sped up. This is where they moved over the course of 24 days. So the colored circles are the positions of these individuals over the course of time. And the gray lines between them show you at any given time who's sensing whom. Okay? These arrows in the back actually show you the currents in the ocean, so which are quite non-trivial, especially when they get red. And they serve to push these guys around quite a bit. So these guys are trying to, do their very simple little, responsive behavior, and these patterns are emerging nonetheless because they're using feedback. And so this was quite a success. I mean, the data set that we recovered was apparently unprecedented for the group of oceanographers who I work with. So we also demonstrated this on data of fish moving around. So here you're looking at the digitized video of fish being tracked in a tank. So on top is a school of 4 fish. On the bottom is a school of 8 fish. These are very small fish. And what we did, because we have this digitized video, we can take the data and at every instant of time compute the measure of synchrony. Here we're looking at heading synchrony. Right? So we know what all the heading angles are. We can compute the measure of synchrony as a function of time. So what I'm plotting for you here is a histogram of that synchrony measure, okay, where 0 actually corresponds to synchronized and 1 corresponds to balanced. And so for this particular group, where these 4 little guys actually were moving around together, you see this peak towards synchrony. And the one on the bottom, you see this peak towards balance. And sure enough, these guys were really just milling around. And the center mass of the group was really going nowhere. Okay, so this gives you a feel for this framework that we've developed. And what I'd like to do now is to show you where we're going with this. So I'm going to give you 3 examples of how we're using this framework to answer some of these open questions that I raised at the very beginning. Okay, so the first example is a look that we're taking. This is in collaboration with Ian Cousin from the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department. So we're looking at a particular data set that consists of a school of 2 fish, okay? And these fish exhibit oscillatory speeds. So they're speeding up and slowing down and speeding up and slowing down. And moreover, when they're doing this, when one guy is speeding up, the other guy is slowing down. So I'll show you the movie. They're moving, they're oscillating spatially with respect to one another, which is quite interesting in and of itself. So we take this mathematical framework that we've developed, and we try to explore, for instance, what are these guys regulating with this behavior, but also what are the possibilities that this kind of oscillatory behavior, perhaps oscillatory information passing, might imply. We've extrapolated, for instance, so those 2 little fish seem to be moving in a relatively straight line, but what if you take these very same rules and apply it to individuals moving around a curve? So remember our individuals that are trying to align their headings and move around the same circle, but what if they're now oscillating their speeds? You get this actually quite beautiful pattern here, where the center of the group is moving around the circle, but these guys are moving in this elliptic pattern relative to one another. And this is quite reminiscent of what you see in nature, where there's this sort of continuous exchanging of roles. Everybody gets to be out front and be seen. Everybody gets to be safe in the inside of the curve. Everybody gets to be back observing everybody, and then they have to take their turn being exposed. It also suggests some very interesting things in the engineered context, because the spatial density of measurement, if these guys were sensors, is quite rich here. So picture this as the boundary of a phytoplankton patch or an eddy in the ocean. These guys would be collecting very rich kind of data. Okay, so the second example is one that is a project that we're doing in collaboration with Simon Levin and Ian Cousin, where we're looking at this group, but we're considering the fact that there may be some heterogeneity in information that these guys have. So most of these guys are perfectly ignorant, but maybe there are some subgroups of perhaps the older, wiser fish who've been there yesterday and have this idea that the food is in one direction. So let's say there's one little subgroup that thinks the food is in direction phi1, and one other little subgroup that thinks the direction is in phi2. Then the question is, can we use our mathematical framework to predict or understand what's going to happen? And what's going to happen is a function of, say, the magnitude of the conflict, or all these guys are sensing one another and still trying to school. These informed individuals aren't identified in any way, and they're not explicitly communicating. They're not saying, hey, you follow me. But they have this little tug, and so we want to understand, for instance, as a function of the magnitude of this little tug, or perhaps the ratio of informed individuals to for uninformed individuals, what's going to happen. So for instance, maybe like on the left here, they'll all synchronize their headings in the direction of phi1, or maybe they'll all synchronize their headings in the direction of phi2, or maybe they'll all split the difference, depending upon these different kinds of parameters. Okay, and my third example is one in which we're taking a hard look at this robustness to noise story. So here's a story where we think very hard about the fact that individuals, when they sense things, are going to be pretty noisy measurements. And when they make decisions, they may have a lot of uncertainty in these decisions. And so we want to understand at the level of the group how robust this synchrony is to this noise. And in particular, we want to understand how robust the synchrony is to the noise as a function of who's sensing whom, the interconnections. Okay, so what you're looking at here is a preliminary result that we can study. And this is on the vertical axis, this is a measure of this robustness at the level of the group. Okay, and so the lower the curve, the better the robustness to noise. And so we've plotted this as a function of the number of agents in the group. And what all these different color symbols represent are different interconnection graphs, different situations of different guys sensing different guys. So we're looking at what kinds of sensing topologies give us the best robustness. And so the one that's, I don't know if you can see it, the bottommost curve, which has these black pluses, that refers to the complete graph. The one where every individual is sensing every other individual. Okay, and that's the one that does the best among these. But you'll notice that the curve corresponding to the green star is a graph which we call the directed star. So this is a graph where every individual is sensing one guy, and that one guy is sensing nobody. Okay, so very, very, very few interconnections, and yet we have this, matches performance and robustness. That's pretty interesting, right? And furthermore, the green star, the filled-in star, refers to the undirected star, meaning that not only can everybody sense this one guy, but he can sense everybody. Okay, so we've just doubled the number of interconnections. You think, oh, that should be better. But no, somehow it leads to a degradation in robustness, right? So there's lots of very subtle things to be understood here. And even this little first kind of result is pointing to some of these interesting ideas. Okay, so finally, I'd like to show you something that's kind of fun, that's brand new. So to complement this kind of mathematical analysis, we're going forward by pursuing additional experiments. And this is a collaboration with Ian Cousin and his research group. And so the idea here is that we're actually physically integrating robots with animals, with fish in this context. And we want to do this so that we can have, somewhat controlled experiments so that we can explore all these different questions that we've been studying. And so what we do is that we make replicas of fish, of real fish. So we take casts of already dead fish, make little fake ones, and we mount them on little sleds, okay? We put them in this tank, so they're swimming around with a real fish. So this tank is something like 4 feet by 7 feet. We raise it off the ground so that we can put little robots, little wheeled robots that can move around under the tank, okay? And then we pair every one of these replicas with a robot. And we do that by putting magnets in the bottom of the sled and magnets on the top of the robot. So the robot moves around and just simply drags its paired replica with it. Okay, then we put a camera overhead. So the camera is taking a video of what's going on. Okay, we do image processing on this video so that essentially we can, via, the computer and Bluetooth, the robot and its fish can know its local environment. It can make decisions on its own. So we have this autonomous little, fake fish that's, infiltrated the group. Well, in fact, we can have many of them. So let me just show you. This is sort of hot off the press. This is brand new. Here is a little run when we made a fake guy actually to look like a scary predator. So the fake guy is swimming around. And here you can see, the kind of image processing that we're doing. So in this case, we're using the image processing, for instance, to collect signals that perhaps this predator might use, like the centroid of the school of fish, or the boundary of the school, or maybe the momentum of the group and when it's going to make its attack. But it's quite interesting. I mean, the top movie is kind of crazy, but you know, one can, in a very controlled way, actually think about how to use this experiment to think about how this particular group is going to respond to disturbances. So when this guy comes close, which takes a little while, you know, it looks like a bite is taken out of this ellipse. And it's very interesting. And when we can, using the video, you can back out what everybody's doing. You can see how guys are moving relative to one another, how the graph is changing as a result of a disturbance, how guys move away, how information may be passed. And we can apply our mathematical tools to try to further understand these questions. Okay, so I'd like to now conclude, but I want to first acknowledge my research group. So my acknowledgement goes out to include past postdocs and students as well, but this is a picture of my current research group. So these are folks that are incredibly creative and insightful and hardworking, and it's really because of them that this work is so much fun and so rewarding. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention.
So, Naomi, is ready to answer questions? Would you like to volunteer one?
So Naomi, it doesn't matter whether they're informed individuals, whether these informed individuals are actually going the right way, right? I mean, you get synchrony independent of whether that has anything to do with the food.
Right.
And so I've always been struck by the parallels with the political decision making.
I don't go there.
I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
But we have actually been trying to
Experts
extend
here.
So that last very elegant experiment that you showed, do you have any sense of how important it is for the robot fish essentially to look the way it does, or to move in a particular way to get that reaction from the school?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I showed you only the case where our fake guy was a predator was that we're still working on getting the case where the fake guy is a conspecific up and running. And the way we're going to actually start to do that, I mean, I think it's actually very, very important. I mean, there's some precedence for this. So people say that, you know, you have to paint on the eyes really carefully on your fake guys. But I think the way they move is really important. So the very first experiment we're going to do is one in which we're going to sort of replicate an experiment that was done with a real fish. So one of Ian's postdocs has run an experiment where one fish gets trained to know that there's something out there. And so, you know, they open the gate and all these fish go out and this guy swims off towards this food. And so we have the digitized video, and so we can back out the path of this guy and we can give it to our fake guy so that when we open the gate and let these guys go, it will be our fake guy doing it, and we'll hope that this will sort of convince the other guys because it's moving in a fish-like way. Even though it's different, it's moving in a fish-like way, and we're hoping to get these guys to respond. I think it also depends upon the species. So some, you know, strong schoolers may be more likely to not care that it's a little funny looking or smells a little different than others.
So if you apply this measure of robustness to natural living fish, can you just get incredible numbers that in terms of how they respond to the environment, approach, is there data out there?
Yeah, so we're actually right in the middle of doing this. So we're looking, you've probably seen, it was on the cover of Physics Today, the starling flocks. So actually we're taking that data and applying these measures. The hard part is that we don't know what the interconnections are. So this is a really interesting way to compare, you know, hypothesized interconnections. So we can look at the starlings, and these people have proved that what the guys do is that their neighborhood doesn't consist of, you know, individuals within a certain radius. They've tried to prove that it consists of, you know, in this case, it's something like 7 nearest neighbors, right? So if we apply that as the way to define what the connections are, we get our graph. The graph changes with time, but we can study that graph. Unfortunately, it's thousands of births, so there's some computational issues, and see what kind of robustness measures we get. We could check if we hypothesize a different sense of paradigm. So instead of it being number of neighbors, it's being distance related. So your neighbors are all the ones within a certain distance, and see how that changes robustness. We can compare it to a random distribution too, to see if this is actually really meaningful. Are they moving themselves in a meaningful way relative to some kind of random? So we're trying that.
How do the fish and your fish robots sense others? Is it strictly visual? Are they sensing skin pressure? Are they hearing each other? And are your robots, do you have sensory models built into them so that they can interact through the same medium?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you mean the robots and not the real? Right. So the real fish have many mechanisms, right? They have vision and they have a lateral line, so they can sense local flow. They can also use olfactory sense. They can smell. In this case, for this species, it's believed that they actually don't use their lateral line in the context of schooling. So George Lauder at Harvard has done some experiments looking at the shed vortices off these guys and realizing that they're not positioning themselves in any special way with respect to that. And also, Ian and his group have noticed that when the lights go down in the lab, the fish don't school at all. Right? They don't get to see. So in this context, we're imagining that vision is playing a central role for them. So for our fake guys, it's very artificial, right? Because we actually have a global picture of everything that's going on. But we can pass to them from the processed image whatever it is that we want. So we could hypothesize that it was vision, and we could, research for these fish what is the radius that they can see, or maybe they can't see behind them, how much they can see, and we could pass that information. So we can manipulate it to look however we want. In fact, we can explore different kinds of hypotheses.
In lots of human-type interactions for groups, we did a very simple level. The individuals have got to get feedback, not just on their neighbors, and not even just about every individual in the group,
Right.
but on the group performance as a whole.
Right.
So in the simple case, 10 people are trying to lift a piano to get without a
Right.
pole or whatever. They better not just watch their neighbors, but someone has to call out, where we hit the doorway or something, you better adjust.
Right.
So some monitoring the group as a whole. I actually think that's quite an important feature of group decision making.
Right.
Without going to that, is there anything at all comparable to that you're aware of in the non-human
Absolutely.
world?
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking that you might want individuals to be able to map how well different groups are doing in order to join the most productive groups, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That'd be a case where they would have to map a group as a whole, not just. So I just wondered if you know if you were.
Yeah, so some of the stuff we do, this is sort of one aspect of the work that we do. Even some of the experiments we've done in the ocean have been have had more of a kind of a centralized information coming in, or something about what's going on at the level of the group coming into individuals. So for instance, we've been looking at problems of individuals. So every guy is taking just a scalar measurement, say, of temperature in the ocean, and we would like them to do things like climb a gradient because we're looking for the cold water. Or we'd even like them to, if it's completely unknown, we'd like them to basically draw us a contour plot, trace a line of 14 degrees C in the ocean and 14.5 degrees C, just to give us some idea of the structure of what's out there. And so what these guys do is they collaborate. In fact, they work like little filters, like a Kalman filter, to work together to try to do this good job, right? So they're getting some feedback about how well they're doing in this kind of things, right? So that they can, follow the curve despite the noise. So that's one kind of example. Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's another kind of question that either you or others have thought about that involves groups and design or engineering in the sense of responses in emergencies. So if your fish are people and you have a fire or an emergency, has anyone ever tried to think about how you use this to design a space to get out faster or any kind of emergency response?
Yeah, I mean, I know that Ian, for instance, looks at, crowd control stuff, so he's looking at, the emotions of people and how they respond. Is that what you're talking about in the context of people, or?
Reverse engineering the question a little more.
In the context of emergency response.
Yeah, for example.
Yeah. I mean, this is what we don't do with emergency response, but we have to, have these guys do patterns for coverage, and we have to worry about them not going off to too shallow depths or they'll run aground. We have to worry about, we get in trouble if there's some big, ship that comes through and, our little yellow guy is getting in the way. So we got to deal with that kind of stuff.
So I have a question about energy efficiency in these types of group dynamics. It seems like in a lot of these underwater robotic situations, one of the limitations is how much energy you have with you, the battery size or the fuel or whatever you're using. Is there a way to tweak your model or to bring this into your model to, say, increase the lifetime that you can gather data? You mentioned that you were able to gather more data than you could collect, but if you could extend your lifetime by, say, coordinating the motion, if the two robots drag off each other, or they avoid certain high-speed currents.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this idea that, we come up with a pattern and then we back out what we do. These patterns that we come up with are ones that have been optimized, for instance, to maximize information. So we have this finite number of individuals. We can compute, as time goes on, what the information landscape looks like. So we want to send the right guy to the right place, right? And how do we do that? These would be the kinds of things that we would do in a separate step, right? Think about what are these patterns that optimize data collection. So that's kind of efficient.
Let's do a couple more.
When you look at the agents, can you also look at a pair of agents, let's say like a mother and a cub or a pup or whatever they call it, fish. Think of a zebra and a cat, it's like where they want to stick near each other, but if they get separated, the herd thing still works. They're still going to stick with zebras rather than
Right,
mommy.
right. So that would be making this more heterogeneous, so that some individuals would have, maybe a stronger attraction to some other individuals, right? I mean, it's an extension of this, and I can't say that we have all the answers yet, but one could examine this by extending the model in that
I
direction.
was guessing when you model it, you have the same rules
Yeah.
for each agent.
Yeah,
And this non-homogeneity would be to, for some of them, put in an extra rule, which is stick with
we'll
her.
stick with her, right? Yeah. So it's kind of like the heterogeneous group where we have these sort of preferred directions. Now it's not a fixed preferred direction; it's maybe a fixed neighbor.
I was just thinking about your Monterey Bay experiment. I'm wondering what the limitations are in terms of time and space correlations, I guess.
Yeah, that's precisely what we look at when we look at this information metric, try to think about patterns, because we have this finite number of individuals, and we have this field that we're trying to map that has given spatial scales and temporal scales. So it's changing in time, and if I take a measurement here, it's going to be useful, but after a while, not anymore. If I take a measurement now, it's going to be useful, but after a while, not anymore. And so I want to somehow space these guys out in a way that reflects those spatial scales. But I want to keep them moving, because I don't want them to sit somewhere, because then they're taking redundant measurements. So likewise, they have to move in a way. So we formally define this information metric that's precisely defined in terms of these scales that maybe we've computed empirically from previous experiments. We know something about how temperature varies in Monterey Bay in August from previous summers. And then we think very hard about how to, the key here is that we use this family of patterns for which we know how to make it emerge. And we optimize over these simple parameters rather than this few number of parameters, rather than thinking about any possible trajectory. That's where we get lost, right? Because then you end up with spaghetti paths. The oceanographers will shoot me if I tell them to do that. So.
So I have one last question, way up the back there. Thank you.
I wanted to ask, is there any evidence of formation of vortices in the school of fish? Like, do the school of fish form vortices of some kind?
Yeah, I think, you know, Ian, for instance, with his research group is looking at these kinds of qualities in the data that they're collecting on these big swarms of fish. What's that? Yeah, the fish movie that I showed at the beginning. You see them going around.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.